Welcome to this masterclass on how to open doors and get contracts so that you can talk about your offering. I'm Mama J. For those of you who don't know, I have been around doing this work for the last 15 years. I have created something called the Impact Activator because what I've seen is that we often have our own transformations or develop our transformational programs. And there's lots and lots and lots of places that you can go to get more grounded, have more understanding, get it for yourself, which is absolutely brilliant. But there's less practical places. And I've regularly seen that there's a gap in providing practical tips. So oftentimes people don't know how to talk about their work without scaring people off, which was the subject of last week's masterclass, or people don't know how to get a contract or find funding. And next week's masterclass is all about where's the money? Show me the money. So you'll want to attend that one. But tonight we're going to talk about opening doors. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because I found this particularly difficult when I first started. So I want to impart some experience and words of wisdom. And hopefully you will be able to take that and put it into your own words. And I'd like to reiterate that there isn't a how-to. I was speaking with someone earlier and what I said was, you are the blueprint. We are all the blueprint. There are no how-tos. There's just how I did it. And the idea of me sharing all my experience and wisdom and headaches with you through these masterclasses and through the Impact Activator program is that you will see what's possible and then be able to put your own flavor on there. Before we get started, in the chat, could you put what you think would be helpful on this subject of how to open doors and win contracts? And there's no wrong answers. Great question from Wendy. Is cold calling ever worth it? And Alfie, feeling good enough, good enough, qualified enough. Yeah. How to write a winning proposal. Love it. Love it. That's next week's conversation, Stuart. But yes, I do like. This will lead towards that. Oh, amazing, George. Making connections, networking, getting to know people first so you know what they're looking for, 100%. And Wendy says, how to move from a friend to a potential resource for funding. I'm going to start with one of the things I've noticed that we don't do, and I didn't either, is research who we're wanting to talk to. And part of the reason why we don't do that is because we tend to be scattergun, talking to everybody about everything. And because we know that, for instance, whatever transformational program you've developed, you know it can help a lot of people. And we don't want to get pigeonholed. And this is not about niching. I believe that your niche finds you. But it is about trying one thing at a time. Because when we try everything, we don't know who we're talking to. And you never have to worry about getting trapped in a niche because your niche finds you. So for instance, when I first started with this transformational idea that I had that I wanted to share with the world, my first real insight was to work with people with addictions because I saw in them, I saw the principles of mind, consciousness and thought alive in them. I saw that they were trapped by what they thought about themselves. I saw that they were amazing, but they didn't know it. And so because I saw this aliveness and because I'd had this massive insight that I talked about before in my volcano moment in the park, that's who I wanted to work with. And at the time, I was going to business networking events, breakfasts and dinners and all sorts of things. And at these events, you have to stand up and say your 1 minute piece and pitch yourself. And I actually really hated them. But what I noticed is I would try to be very generic because I wanted to work with anyone, anyone who'd pay me, I'd be happy to work with them. And so I ended up working with no one because people couldn't hear. And after my insight about working with addictions, I was going to one of these events and I said to my husband, I don't know what to talk about. And he said, addiction. Of course, that's what you've seen. That's what you're passionate about. So that's what you should talk about. And I really was nervous. I didn't want to, it was a very, very boozy networking event where mostly the thing that we did was we'd have this lunch and lots of wine and everything, and then we'd go on somewhere. And it was great fun, by the way. But apart from that, it was, I thought, well, how can I talk about addictions to that lot? They're going to throw me out. But I listened to him and they asked me what I did. And I said, I've got a transformational program that helps people overcome addiction. I'd been business networking for about 18 months at that point and never had a client. I can't tell you, my next week was booked. People came to me during the event talking about their brother who was a drug addict, or their sister who had gone into prison, or their mom. Not often about themselves, but usually about someone in their life that had an addiction issue, and they wanted to know how to solve it, how to help. So I really saw that when you talk about what you're passionate about, where you can help someone, instead of being generic, people hear it. They hear it on a different level. A coach that I work with often says one thing, choose one thing to talk about. And I have found that very, very difficult. But I see when you talk about that one thing, that one person who's got that one problem finds you. When you talk about everything, it's just overwhelming. It's just overwhelming. One of the reasons why I've done these masterclasses is to take out a slither of what we'll cover on the Impact Activator and talk about that one thing. Alfie says, so we need a focus to use as a framework to give people something to anchor onto. Yeah. And then just stick with that. Stick with that. If that's something that I know we've talked before about being the embodied experience, and people can think, oh, I haven't had an embodied experience. But your lived experience is your embodied experience. Your life is your embodied experience. And that's what you can bring to the table, what you've seen about your life. In a way, that's what I'm doing now, right? What I've seen about working in this arena and what's helped me, that's what I'm talking about. Another story about how that played out, which you may have heard before, was in the prison. So I've been working with addiction for a while, about 18 months. I volunteered in the local community. I didn't expect anyone to pay for the community work. I had private clients, and then I volunteered in the community, and I was doing a lot of work in the community because that's what I loved doing. And I was doing that for about 18 months. I got invited to speak to addiction groups and places like that. And then I eventually got a meeting with the substance misuse manager at the prison. And I'm going to start this with, we don't know where the money is going to come from. We don't know where the work is going to come from. We don't know where the niche is going to come from. All we can do is show up and do what we do know and be open to where that will go. I worked with a client who had overcome addictions, only believed in the 12 steps, did not believe in what I was doing at all, and didn't think that I should be talking to what he called addicts. I managed to persuade him to connect me with the substance misuse manager because he'd been doing some work. So I went along to the prison to meet with the substance misuse manager, totally unprepared, didn't do my research, all the things I'm going to teach you about, didn't do any of that. I went along, but I brought with me someone who had been working with me on my program because I believed in lived experience and peer mentoring back in the day before it was a thing. And I took along someone with me, and I went to the prison, and we were sat in front of the substance misuse manager and the head of the NHS, which is the English health care system. And the substance misuse manager was married to a forensic psychologist. So it was very early days. This is, back in 2014. I really didn't know why people were changing. I didn't even understand about insight. And he would say, well, how do they change? And I'd say, I don't know. I just talk to them and they change. And he kept asking me that in different ways, and I kept answering that in different ways. And I could see that he just thought I was some sort of woo-woo, Wookiee person who'd come along with another thing, and they hear it all the time. The meeting hadn't started very well, just a quick aside, because I had brought along this fella, and I'd been escorted to the toilets. And while I was in the toilet, all the bells went off and there were prison officers running around everywhere. And my escort, banged on the door, like, you have to get back to the room. We have to protect you. And I was petrified. And in my imagination, big shutters came down and I was going to be in prison forever. Anyway, we went back to the room. And my colleague said, that big green button on the wall, it's not a light switch, is it? And he'd pressed the panic alarm. So the whole prison had gone on lockdown because he pressed the panic alarm. The substance misuse manager called them all off and said it was it was an accident. So it hadn't started very well at all. Anyway, we had this conversation. How do they change? I don't know. We just have conversations and they change. At some point, I could feel I was so heady and I was getting nowhere and I felt desperate. I thought, I can't explain. What am I doing here? And I said, could we stop for a coffee? Would that be okay? And he said, yeah, of course. So we went and got a coffee and just mingled. And it gave me time to calm down. So that's tip number one. You've always got the opportunity to slow down. Always. Go at your pace. Because when you do that, you allow access to new thought, new ideas. And I said, I know that I'm not very eloquent at talking about this, and I've been volunteering for quite a while now, but I've honestly seen a lot of changes. Something happens where their thinking just changes. And he went, oh, yeah, well, that makes sense. After grilling me for half an hour. And I said, oh, yeah, well, that's it. And he said, well, I've got a quote on my wall by Richard Carlson. Stop thinking and start living. And I went, yeah, that's it. That's the thing that I'm trying to tell you about. And there's a funny story where he eventually thought that Richard Carlson taught Sydney Banks. But anyway, that was it. That was the in. Now, I couldn't have researched that because I didn't know that he knew that. But what I've seen now is if you spend a little bit of time looking at who you're going to be meeting with, just having a look, see what you can find on the internet, see what they're getting up to, see what the prison's doing, etc. Yes, you have facts and figures, which are helpful, and you can use their language, but also something happens where your mind calms down and you get information that you didn't know. And that's what happened when I had that coffee. I just thought to say their thinking changes and then they change. And he got that. And I couldn't have known that, but because my mind was calm and the research and the background stuff that you do before the meeting helps you to have the calm mind, but also helps you to hook in, to understand where they're at and to show them that you understand. I've seen so many people talking at the client, telling them about their amazing thing. And the client just goes, can't hear anything. For instance, in the homeless charity that we worked with last year, they're a Christian charity. They don't want you talking about spiritual essence and nature and all of these things. They want to know that you can help people shift from blaming everybody else to a place of self-efficacy. So that's what we talked about. We didn't talk about spiritual lessons. Now that came up and she actually asked us, can you not mention the spiritual aspect of this? Then that becomes a choice. If you don't want to do that work, that's the point where you could say, well, no, not really. For me, I thought, well, they get that anyway, so I'm not worried whether we mention it or not because it comes from the feeling in the room. Doesn't matter what you say, really, which Alfie's just pointed out. He got it because you calm into a space and instead of trying to use words, you're in a calm space and you're connected in a different way. The vulnerable adults that we're working with at the moment, the charity that got us into that program, they wanted us very much not to interfere with the therapy that these parents are having. And they have 2 years of really intense therapy, which, dread to think what that is. But they want to know you're not going to get in the way of that. And when you do your research, you realise, first of all, do I want to work with this organisation? But you also realise where you can go with what you've got. Our personal mind doesn't like silence, doesn't like feeling uncomfortable, feels the need to explain itself, prove itself. Whereas in actual fact, the more silence, space, listening that can be done, the better. So in a way, the stuff that we do beforehand, the research and the other things that I'm going to talk about, is allowing you the space to not over explain. In most of, I've won contracts, I've raised money on funding, I've won different sorts of contracts with different sorts of people and amounting to thousands of pounds as well. My first contract at that prison was £90,000. So we're not talking about a few quid. We're talking about lots of money and then different ones along the way. And I see that, apart from the first one, which was like almost a miracle, the quieter that I get and the more confident, if you like, that I can feel, I'm going to say, is this a fit? It's not, I'm desperate to work here and therefore I'll say anything to get me in the door. It's more like, is this a fit? Do we feel we can work together? And in that space, you are seeing, can I do this? Do I want to do it? Is this right for me? And therefore, have I got something that I can bring to value to you? When I go to networking events now and I talk to different people, I'm actually listening for, is this valuable to you? Because I don't sell what we've got as a fix everything. I sell what we've got as a, this will enhance what you've already got. And therefore it's less threatening, because so this is secret number 2. It's less threatening. This will enhance. And I believe that too, because when we worked in the prison, we worked with substance misuse and their remit was to do CBT. So we were totally not that. And they ended up changing their programs to include Sydney Banks and to include what they called psychological innocence. I don't think they made that name up. And to include another program which was all about what we teach. Because they really saw, oh, actually, if we do that alongside what we've already got, we have people more calmed down. That's what they used to say. They say, well, we like people who've been on your class before they do our class because they come more calmed down. They come more ready to listen. They come more, less blaming, less looking externally. So the people themselves would get more from those programs because they knew what they were meant to be getting. Because the other aspect, if you're working with vulnerable populations, the other aspect is that they have to take some of these classes. And so you can't be teaching them, trust your own wisdom, and then they refuse to take the class because that will often stop them getting, ahead in whatever system they're in. So you have to teach them, you will hear something in that program when you trust your own wisdom. There's a subtlety to changing that. I worked with many people who did AA fellowship at the same time. I never told them not to go to the fellowship. I often helped them put some of the teachings of the fellowship into a context that they could understand. Sometimes they'd say, the only time I ever think about alcohol is when I go to AA, so I'm not actually going to go to AA anymore. I remember working with some female ex-offenders up in Glasgow, and they were on this horrendous program, and these programs still exist, where you sit in the middle of the room and everybody tells you how bad you are and how they've made you feel, or you've made them feel, and why you have to change. So it's like a shaming or something. I don't really get what it's meant to be doing. But they had to do this program. It was mandated. So I couldn't say, well, trust your wisdom and don't go to that program. In that time, I felt it was my duty to help them see it doesn't matter what you go through when they do that to you. It's temporary. You're going to go through some shame. You're going to go through some guilt. You're going to feel the feels, but that's temporary. See what is alive for you beneath that. And if there's nothing, you can let that go afterwards. And you can go back to your well-being. In the same way, when I did writing class, my writing teacher absolutely recommended we go to our dark and we get in there, because that's your palette. That's where you can draw from, because the dark is not frightening from here. It's just the dark. And I can go to the dark. I can feel those terrible things that I experienced. I can get impacted by it, But then I know I'm not still there. That's just a memory that I've just revisited temporarily. So I would help them with that. So I know we've gone a little bit off track because we're talking about the actual running of the groups there, but it's the same thing. It's seeing where you are and who you're with and how you can be of most service to them in that moment with what we know, which is beyond words. We're all innocently doing our best, right? I'm sharing what I've seen and what I've seen works and what I've seen doesn't work. And when I teach the principles, say in a group, I teach the principles. I don't bring other things. And I do bring a purity to it, if you like, as in, I don't mix it with other things. But that's a preference because that's what I've seen for myself as being useful. Equally, you could say, I bring me to the party, right? So I have a laugh. I do Mama J stuff. I talk about stories. When I first went into prison, the rules about sharing your own personal story, as you probably know, like you're not supposed to do that. Therapists don't share their own personal story. You're supposed to have these boundaries between you and all the rest of it. But in actual fact, we found that the stories, especially the personal stories, what hit the most. When you talk about your lived experience, the people that you're talking to see you as one of them and are able to open up in a way greater way. Is that right or is that wrong? I don't know, but it's what I did. It's what I brought to the table. And I did get lots of offers of people wanting to bring Qigong and various things in. It's not the way I teach, but I don't say that you can't teach that way. I think that you have to go with what you know and feel and what works for you. It's the same in a coaching conversation. If there's rules in a coaching conversation about you can't say this and you can't say that and you can't tell people what to do, I'd be drummed out of the society if I was in one, because sometimes it's helpful to say, I've tried this thing. Would that be useful? And people always, I see that there's a balance, because if you go too far to tell people what to do, that's not what they need. They need to know what they need to do. But equally, when I work with business coaches and people who run stuff, they want to bounce ideas around. They want to say, I'm running a listening workshop. How have you done it? I've never done it before. And so I bring my experience to the table then, and I talk about my experience. So there is a dance, there's a balance between the form and the formless, which I believe is what Sid talked about anyway. And for many years, I just wanted to teach the principles, and I thought that's what was needed. But having now experienced working with hundreds of people, I see that people need pragmatic stuff as well. People in prison need to learn how to drive a forklift. People who are wanting to run groups don't necessarily know how to facilitate a group. People who want to get funding don't necessarily have never written a funding application before, so don't know what goes into that. And you have to have the grounding to know it's coming from me, and that's what gives you the confidence, and that's what helps you to lean back into what we don't know. But there's nothing wrong with sharing the practical as well and giving people a leg up. It's so needed. And I was talking to a friend yesterday evening who said back in the day, they talked about, with Roger Mills, they talked about having the three principles understanding be on every corner with like the fellowships are. And then here I am talking about that same thing. And she was like, wow, that thing landed on you. Like, isn't that amazing how that works? So I also see that this isn't new. What we talk about isn't new. It's for me, it saved my life. It saved my life. I wouldn't have a happy marriage without the principles. I wouldn't have done the amazing work that I've done without it. For me, the principles were the portal to the essence of life. And they woke me up, and they had me overcome my CPTSD, and they had me find myself in my later life in a much more authentic and real way than I've ever been. So to me, they are everything. But the name, the words, that's not it, is it? That's a framework. And we can have frameworks. We can have fun with frameworks. My first framework was called REAP. I developed a methodology called REAP because there wasn't a methodology. There wasn't a framework back in the day. So I developed one for myself. And when I first went into prison and into addiction centres, that's what I talked about. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you guys is, and nobody cares so long as you feel confident with what you're sharing. So whether I talked about REAP or whether I talked about innate health or whether I talked about the research, if you know, I know that this is true and it's backed up by XXX, and you're open enough to listen and have that conversation, they don't care. No one ever asked me for that REAP. And I did a whole diagram and everything else. Reality, experience, awareness, and permanence was what it stood for. And, I had a booklet and had everything. On the program, I am going to share templates and resources and things like that. Not to overcomplicate things. I think all you need is a simple PDF that says what you're trying to do and how you can help, that has some of the research, whichever research you pick out, that has what your philosophy is or what they call theory of change is. Over time you develop it, because over time you get to know as you're working with people, with something to pointing towards the research and a testimonial. And that one page can probably open more doors than you can imagine. Because if it's just simple in language that they'll understand, not we talked about this in another masterclass, didn't we? Not the fluffy language, not the language of the in crowd, language that they will understand. So not separate realities, but all people think differently. Not the essence of life, but there's a wisdom in nature. Do you know what I mean? So you use the language that works for you, but that is very simple, and you can ask ChatGPT. ChatGPT will help you. But a simple PDF that has that, what you're trying to do and the outcome, a couple of papers to point to, which are plenty now. There are none in my day, and a testimonial, and in your colours or whatever. With the free tool of Canva, you can make that. And that will open more doors than you imagine. And then basically, you ask everyone. Yeah. You just go, right, I'm going to target addiction. That I never ended up working with any addiction organisation, but I knocked a lot of doors. I only ever worked with this very renegade guy who said, you can come to our class. We love what you're talking about. And he was the one who got me into Coventry, and I did loads and loads of work with them. But the addiction agencies, none of them wanted to know. And that's okay, because that's part of your process. Part of your process will be seeing if what you're saying makes sense. Are they saying no because they don't understand what you're saying? Or are they saying no because they've got their own thing that already works or some other reason. Part of your process will be telling people about what you do and talking about it in a simple way that makes sense to them. Whether they buy or not doesn't matter. Eventually, and we'll talk about this much more next week, you'll find the money. I can tell you right now, the money is out there. It doesn't matter where we are in the economy, what government we're in, what's happened. The money is there. Money is a energy and it is an infinite resource. We just have a lot of thinking about how to get it, but I can tell you it is absolutely out there and you can get it. I've raised thousands with crowdfunding. I've raised thousands with personal private funding. I've raised contracts, as I've said. It's out there. It's out there. We just have to figure out the best route to get it. And the best route to get it is often showing up, doing what you do, keeping the faith, and being really clear about the service that you provide so that you can find your one person. My coach likes to say, you're the one. You're the one, and the one that needs you will find you. Tell me in the chat the biggest takeaway from this class. And I'll let you know that one of the reasons I've set up Impact Activator is because you don't have to do this on your own. Enhance what they want to accomplish. Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot easier conversation that way. The freedom to do it my way and not by the rules. Yes, we love that. Well done, Alfie. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that, if that is really what you're taking away, write that down. Put that at the top of your journal because you want to keep coming back to that. Jean says, work with what they already are doing and know that this will enhance that. Yeah, love it, Jean. Love it. Not letting my thoughts about money and how to get it block the answers that are right in front of me for each particular situation. Yes. Be aware, some people's wisdom needs to hear others' examples so it can find its own response in that reflection. That's beautiful, Alfie. Impact Activator starts 10th of March. Some people on here are already on it. And thank you very much. Can't wait to run that with you. It will be lots of this. There'll be templates. There'll be discussions. I want to activate all you impactors, if that's a word, because that's how we bring it to the world. We find the way of merging the practical and the profound. And I've seen a little goes a long way. There's people here that are on our buddy scheme and we send in paperwork packs to people who have never met any of us and they write handwritten letters and they write to each other and they get insights and their shift in understanding. A little goes a long way. We don't have to share everything we know. We just have to be patient and share the little bits that come along. We can have great impact in the world.